on a sweltering night in the Mississippi Delta Gast, 12th 1847. 2 infant boys were born to Colonel Richard Bowmont's wife at Magnolia Creek Plantation. One child, pale as moonlight. The other dark as river mud. Within 3 days, 4 people would be dead. Within 2 weeks, 17 more would vanish. The county records, sealed for 93 years by the governor's order, contained a shocking medical secret known as superfecundation, heteropaternal twins, born to different fathers. But even that was nothing compared to the systematic murders, conspiracy of silence, and the rebellion that nearly brought the Delta to its knees. Before we dive into the dark secrets buried by the richest soil in Issaquah County, make sure you are subscribed to the Forgotten Liturgy. The horror of that August night began 7 months earlier in the cold, cruel mathematics of the antebellum South. Colonel Richard Bowmont, a 6-foot planter with premature silver hair and chilling, colorless eyes, a well that had no bottom, inherited Magnolia Creek, a 4,000-acre cotton factory sustained by 263 enslaved people. Richard married Catherine Strafford in 1843, a merger of Delta cotton and low country rice, educated, fluent in French, and highly protected. Catherine tried to make peace with her life in the Grand Greek Revival House. But the Delta was a world of lethal contradictions, where immense wealth was built on invisible brutality. The colonel immediately demanded a son, an heir to continue the Bowmont name. When Catherine gave birth to a girl, Margaret, in 1845, the child was prematurely small. Catherine protected her fiercely, nursing her despite her husband's wishes. But after only 3 weeks, Catherine woke to find Margaret cold in her cradle. The official cause was crib death. But Catherine had heard her husband's footsteps in the nursery at 2 a.m. She had no proof. Only a mother's instinct and the chilling realization that her husband was something fundamentally broken and dangerous. This knowledge changed her after a subsequent miscarriage, which Catherine suspected was chemically induced by a tea her husband gave her. The marriage was reduced to a cold social performance. The house became a silent battlefield. Then Catherine met Solomon Tutweiler. Solomon was the overseer's driver, a position that normally required physical menace. Solomon, however, was nearly 6.5 feet tall, but lean, his intelligence making him invaluable to the overseer, Klaus Hoffman. Yet terrifying to the enslaved people of Magnolia Creek, Solomon had been a dangerous commodity from the start. Purchased at age 15. His previous owner noted his ability to read and his talent for understanding complex systems and predicting behavior. Colonel Bowmont the planter with the chilling, colorless eye saw, not a person, but economic potential. A smart slave, properly directed, could be more valuable than 10 strong ones. By 1847, 24-year-old Solomon effectively ran the enslaved workforce, predicting yields, scheduling planting, and, most terrifyingly, knowing precisely how to prevent resistance. He kept himself alive by manipulating the system and informing on his fellow slaves, enforcing discipline with clinical efficiency. This gave him unusual mobility and better conditions, making him the most dangerous man on the plantation, but not in the way anyone assumed. Catherine first registered Solomon in December 1846, while distributing paternalistic Christmas gifts. Solomon looked at her not with submission or hatred, but with recognition as if he saw past her role as mistress to the grieving woman beneath, the one who knew about the death of her daughter, Margaret. That moment shattered Catherine's internal defenses. In January, Catherine orchestrated their first private conversation, requesting a literate helper to catalog the library. Working in silence, she finally broke the tension. "I have kept myself alive, ma'am. I'm not certain that counts as success." That rare honesty, and Solomon's quiet, perceptive sympathy over her dead daughter, forged an unspoken bond. Over the following weeks, Catherine learned of his calculated survival strategy. Born in Charleston, taught to read in secret, surviving 5 plantations by being smarter than his owners. Solomon, in turn, learned Catherine's deepest fear, her conviction that her husband had murdered their daughter to get a more robust heir. When Catherine, in a moment of despair, asked why he didn't run, Solomon's answer was chillingly logical. "Ma'am, smart slaves don't run. They know the statistics. For everyone who makes it to freedom, 99 are caught and tortured as examples." But he quickly corrected himself. "I don't run. I didn't say. I don't resist." The conversation took place on March 19th, the same day Catherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she didn't tell anyone. She was consumed by fear. If the child was a son, he would be raised to be a new Richard Bowmont, inheriting the cycle of cruelty. If it was a daughter, she might not survive the Colonel's cold calculation. Her desperation led her to a terrifying plan, built on a statistical improbability found in her husband's medical library. Superfecundation, the rare chance of conceiving twins from 2 different fathers. If one child was visibly not the Colonel's, he might reject that child, allowing Catherine to raise it separately, salvaging at least one life from the cycle of brutality. On May 2 months into her pregnancy, she faced Solomon in the library. "If I asked you to help me destroy something," she asked, "would you?" Solomon went still. "That would depend on what you wanted destroyed." Catherine finally turned to face him, the truth hammering in her chest. "I'm pregnant, 2 months along. The baby is the Colonel's. You're asking me to... ... Solomon didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Violation of every societal, legal, and spiritual code. Catherine didn't flinch. She admitted she understood the cost. "You'd be killed. Probably tortured first. I would be destroyed socially." Solomon cut to the core of her motive. "Is this really about saving a child, or is this about revenge?" Catherine's answer was chillingly honest. "Both. Does it matter?" Solomon insisted it did, warning that revenge consumes everything. Catherine conceded. "Then it's about survival. Mine and the child's. Is that acceptable?" After an agonizing silence, Solomon nodded once, when the timing had to be perfect. Leveraging a Wednesday afternoon, when the Colonel was in Vicksburg, and the overseer Hoffman was preoccupied. On May 27, 1847, at 2 p.m., Catherine and Solomon met in the dusty, disused smokehouse. The act was swift and silent. As she left, Catherine saw genuine anguish on Solomon's face. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be," she replied, breaking every rule by touching his hand. "You were a person helping another person survive. That's all." That night, Catherine lay awake, terrified she had either saved a life or condemned to. The oppressive summer that followed was a slow burn. The Colonel, facing falling cotton prices and increasing paranoia, grew volatile. His administrative cruelty curdled into direct brutality. He personally watched whippings and searched the quarters late at night. Solomon navigated this tension with surgical precision. He maintained his loyalty while simultaneously beginning to make small mistakes, miscalculations in water supply, forgotten messages, misplaced workers. Individually minor, these errors were actually small pockets of disorder, creating moments where the system's rigid control slipped. Catherine, watching Solomon constantly, realized he wasn't making mistakes, he was creating opportunities. In late July, she managed a brief whisper in the hallway, "You're planning something." Solomon's gaze was direct. "You're not the only one who wants to see something destroyed, Mrs. Bowmont. You just gave me a reason to accelerate the timeline." What followed in early August confirmed her deepest fears and hopes. From her vantage point on the second-floor balcony, Catherine saw a pattern: small thefts of rope, lamp oil, knives, and blankets. Solomon wasn't just disrupting the system. He was stockpiling resources, preparing for something violent. The simmering tensions finally reached a violent peak on August 8th. just 4 days before Catherine would give birth. The Colonel's cold, gray eyes had fixed on a 15-year-old housemaid named Ruth. That afternoon, Colonel Bowmont committed another atrocity, assaulting Ruth, the 15-year-old housemaid, in his study. An older enslaved woman, Bess, found Ruth, bleeding and sobbing, and quietly helped her, offering the same survival advice she'd given countless others: silence. But Solomon, witnessing Ruth's blank horror, felt something snap after 24 years of suppressed rage. He calmly reported Ruth's injury to the overseer, Hoffman, with a dangerous flatness in his voice that finally unsettled the German. Learning about Ruth cemented the cold, final certainty in Catherine's heart. She was living with a murderer. That evening, she wrote a hidden letter to her brother: "If anything should happen to me during childbirth, you must know that it was not God's will or natural misfortune." She sealed it in her Bible, a record, an accusation. On the night of August 11th, Catherine went into labor. She desperately kept her husband unaware, informing only the midwife, Dina, and Bess, while the main house waited for the transaction of an heir. Solomon made his rounds, whispering a cryptic message at every cabin door: "Tonight, be ready when you hear the bell." At 3:15 a.m., the first baby arrived quickly, a boy, pale, blonde-haired, and with a strong cry, the Colonel's heir. But before Catherine could take him, a stronger contraction seized her. Dina gasped, "Ma'am, there's another one. You're carrying twins." At 3:47 a.m., the second boy was born. He was slightly larger, with caramel-colored skin and hints of brown in his eyes. Superfecundation had worked. Dina's hands froze when she saw the unmistakable difference. As Catherine held both infants, one in each arm, the bedroom door opened. The Colonel stood there, having come to see his heir. He saw the first baby, the pale one, then his eyes fixed on the second. The terrible flatness in his eyes gave way to something colder than anger, a calculation. "Whose is he?" the Colonel asked, his voice sharp as a blade. He leaned in, examining the darker twin with the detachment of inspecting a flaw in cotton. "Don't insult me, Catherine. I may be many things, but I'm not blind." "Whose is he?" Colonel Bowmont received the confession, the impossible admission of superfecundation and cross-racial intimacy, not with rage, but with cold, calculated satisfaction. He quickly banished the midwife Dina and laid out his plan. Catherine would be institutionalized, her confession used as proof of madness, securing his control over the narrative and the pale twin. As for Solomon, a slave who touches a white woman hangs. That's the law. That's civilization. That's order. Catherine fought back, screaming a furious defiance. "Hang me, too. I'm equally guilty." The Colonel simply smiled, revealing his final, crushing cruelty. "I'll keep the white one, but the other is an abomination, a stain on my family's name. I'll have him taken to the quarters, sold downriver as soon as possible, and he'll die there, forgotten." When he reached for the babies, Catherine, despite being exhausted and bleeding, fought back for the first time in her life. The chaos was instantly cut through by an impossible sound, the deep, resonant toll of a bell. Everyone, Catherine, Bess, Hoffman, and the Colonel from Magnolia Creek, had no bell. The toll came again and again, rhythmic, impossible. Looking out the window, Hoffman turned pale. The slave quarters were on fire. Not one structure, but every single cabin was burning simultaneously, flames licking the pre-dawn sky. Silhouetted against the orange glow, dozens of enslaved people stood in absolute silence, watching the main house. They were not running. They were organized. The Colonel immediately recognized it. It's a signal. They've organized. This is rebellion. Then, a figure emerged from the smoke, walking slowly and deliberately up the path. Solomon, tall and unhurried. The Colonel's controlled fury was replaced by shock. He planned this, all of it. The Colonel locked Catherine in her room and ran downstairs with Hoffman to protect the weapons cabinet, leaving Catherine, with her newborn sons, as the rebellion reached the house. The subsequent hour was a nightmare of fire and blood. The rebels, guided by Solomon's careful planning, didn't storm the house. They trapped it. They locked the doors and set fire to the ground floor. Starting in the kitchen, Hoffman, armed with a pistol, realized too late he was sealed inside the inferno. He fought his way out of the study and threw open the window, intending to jump, only to find Solomon waiting below. "Don't," Solomon said simply, holding a stolen pistol. "You can jump and die quickly, or you can burn and die slowly. But either way, you're dying tonight." Klaus Hoffman, the overseer, faced Solomon at the window. When Hoffman, believing his own lie, insisted, "I treated you fairly," Solomon corrected him with chilling finality. "You treated me like I was intelligent property instead of stupid property. That's not fairness, Klaus. That's just a different kind of exploitation." Leaving Hoffman to the agonizing choice of jumping or burning, Solomon walked away, and the overseer died in the fire, surrounded by the account books that defined his life. Colonel Bowmont, meanwhile, broke the lock on Catherine's door and demanded she and the 2 infants come with him to escape via the Widow's Walk. He wanted to save them all 3 of his property from being surrendered to slaves. But Catherine, seeing her husband with complete clarity for the first time, refused. "I'm not going with you. I'm done, Richard. I've been dead inside this house for years. The only difference now is that the house is burning too." She declared she would trust Solomon with her sons' lives more than she ever trusted him. The colonel's face cracked with rage. He blocked her path, but Catherine stood firm. "Then we'll burn together. At least we'll be warm." Faced with her unyielding will, the colonel stepped aside and let her pass, vowing to hunt her down for the rest of his life. "Yes, I will," Catherine declared, leaving him with a final, devastating prophecy. "Because you're going to die in this house tonight, trying to save your ledgers, your documents, your proof of ownership." As Catherine stumbled down the burning stairs, the colonel ran, not toward escape, but toward his study, to save his identity. He found Hoffman's cooling body and reached for his ledgers, but the ceiling collapsed on him before he could save even half of them. He died instantly, crushed beneath burning beams, surrounded by the documents that had meant more to him than his own family. Catherine made it out into the pre-dawn air and collapsed, her legs giving out, both babies secured in her arms. Solomon was instantly kneeling beside her. "I didn't think you'd make it out," he said. They needed to move. The neighboring planters would soon arrive, with Catherine unable to walk further. Solomon made the only viable decision. "Give me one. If we split up, if we separate the twins, there's a better chance that at least one survives. If we stay together, we all die when they catch us." Catherine, facing the impossible choice of which son to condemn to a life of uncertain danger and which to potentially save, slowly and carefully handed Solomon the darker twin, her biological son. "His name is Thomas," she whispered, "after my brother. Promise me you'll know he was named for someone." Solomon promised. The pale twin, the colonel's son, remained in her arms. "James," she said. "I'll call him James." Solomon then turned and melted into the forest, taking Thomas with him. Catherine never saw him again. She forced herself to walk south toward Charleston, but was found only 2 miles later by a search party, passed out from blood loss. James was still alive. The official story of the August 1847 tragedy was a lie. Colonel Bowmont died a hero saving documents. Catherine, traumatized by childbirth, was institutionalized, and the 263 enslaved people who attempted escape were mostly recaptured. The truth, however, was that Catherine did return to Charleston. Her brother Thomas, having recovered her hidden letter, understood everything. Catherine Bowmont was not institutionalized. Her brother, Thomas Strafford, used his connections to place her in a discreet boarding house, where she quietly raised James, the pale twin. James thrived, growing into an intelligent, healthy child, believing the official lie that his father had died a hero in the fire. In 1849, Catherine remarried, finding a stable life and having 3 more children. Until her death in 1891, Catherine kept a hidden journal, consumed by guilt not for betraying her husband, but for not being brave enough to keep both babies. She rationalized the choice, telling herself separating them gave each a chance at life. James inherited status and money, while Thomas inherited the possibility of actual freedom. The story of Solomon and Thomas is harder to trace. Shrouded in the secrecy of the Underground Railroad, the fire allowed an unusually high number, approximately 47, enslaved people to successfully escape. Fragmentary records suggest a tall black man with an infant made it to Cincinnati, Ohio, by late 1847. By 1852, a man named Solomon Turner, note the name change, appeared in Chatham, Ontario, a Canadian settlement for fugitive slaves. He lived with a young boy named Thomas, who had notably light skin. The details align too precisely to be coincidence. If this was the Magnolia Creek Solomon, he kept his promise. Thomas Turner grew up free, learning carpentry, literacy, and self-worth. He married in 1867, became a school teacher and community organizer, and died in 1904 at age 57, a pillar of the community, surrounded by grandchildren who knew nothing of the violence that birthed his freedom. The historical record contains one final, agonizing document, a letter dated September 3, 1890, written by the elderly Catherine to Thomas. If you still live. In it, she finally confessed the full truth, the reason for the separation, and the identity of his father. Your father, Solomon Tutweiler, was the bravest and most intelligent man I ever met, she wrote, affirming their act was mutual survival. She revealed that Solomon's rebellion was planned so precisely that 47 people found freedom. Her final words to the son she gave away were a desperate plea for understanding. If you lived, know that you were wanted, that your birth, however complicated and violent, was not shameful, but defiant, that you were loved even in the moment I had to let you go. Catherine died in 1891, the letter never sent, her guilt a stone she carried for 44 years. James Bowmont grew up to be a successful attorney in Atlanta, quietly helping formerly enslaved people during Reconstruction. He died in 1902, respected and successful, but completely ignorant of his twin brother, his father's cruelty, or the rebellion that marked his birth. The land of Magnolia Creek became a cautionary tale for planters and was soon abandoned, changing hands 7 times by 1900. Locals claimed the land was cursed, but more likely, the collective memory and pain made it impossible to maintain control. By the 20th century, the ruins were gone, and the land was worked by sharecroppers, many of them descendants of the enslaved people. Only the grave marker of the Colonel's first daughter, Margaret Bowmont, remained clear, gone too soon, a fitting epitaph for everyone touched by the tragedy. The story concludes with the powerful certainty that even in systems of absolute control, power is conditional. A single, impossible choice and an act of calculated resistance, sparked by a mother's desperation and a slave's long-held plan, proved that change is possible, and that some truths are simply too dangerous to keep buried.